Now, here's a couple of truisms about sin. One, sin makes you stupid. Two, if you choose to sin, you choose to suffer. Both of those realities are seen in the story of David. I mean, because of David's sin, because of his lust and his murderous actions, basically the consequences of that would be visited upon his family, even to his very closest family. There would be a lot of violence and lustful sin. You choose to sin, you choose to suffer. That's the way it was with David. Whenever the Bible mentions polygamy, the marrying of more than one wife, it was always in a bad light. It was never good. It wasn't that God condoned it or said, this is a good idea. Originally, it was man plus wife equals marriage, So it was never to be polygamy. And when David, because of his lust, he had many wives, and it got him into trouble. I mean, his lust produced a fairly large harem, and out of that, from one wife, there was a son born named Amnon. To another wife was a daughter born named Tamar, and her brother Absalom. Tamar and Absalom were kind of model people. They were gorgeous, that kind of thing. Amnon had a liking on for Tamar, his half sister. And so he devised this plot one day to, get her to come and be with him. So he pretended to be sick. And then he'd send away his servants and he would try to woo her into his bed. And it didn't work. She didn't agree. So he forced himself upon her and raped her. And then tossed her out. And from that point on, hated her. Now, to be raped in those days was to be put onto the outcast list. And so she went and lived with her brother Absalom. And it didn't take Absalom long to realize what had happened. And so then he got angry. He wanted revenge. He was out for blood. He was going to kill Amnon, his half-brother. But he waited. He developed a plan and a plot over 2 years of brooding in this thing. Sin makes you stupid. And he developed this hatred for Amnon. And there's even some evidence that David kind of got word of this, but, knew that the rape had happened, but he never did anything about it. So Absalom took matters into his own hands. After a fairly long waiting period, 2 years, he premeditated and murdered Amnon, his half-brother. Again, David did nothing about that either. Choose to sin, choose to suffer. And David loved his kids so much so that he actually didn't discipline them because he didn't want to, be that guy. So because he didn't discipline them, trouble just began to brew and came back to haunt David. It turns out that probably had he disciplined Amnon for the rape, it would have saved his life. Had he disciplined Absalom, probably would have saved his life. But as it was, seems to come this time that Absalom really rebelled, or he grew rebellion in his heart against his dad. Perhaps because he had done nothing originally about that rape. As hard as it is, sometimes there seems to come a time in the life of every believer that you have to say to somebody that you love, hey, this is not the way we do things here, or that's wrong. And that's a hard thing to do, but somewhere along the line we are called to do those kind of things. But David didn't do that. And Absalom then set himself up against his dad, making himself sort of a pseudo king or pseudo judge, and he would call people to him and basically say, look, he'd undercut his father David. He would say, the king is so busy. He doesn't have time to deal with you, but I'll deal with you. Or the king doesn't really care about you, but I care about you. And he started calling people to him and saying, you know, if I was king, things would be better around here. Things would be different. And so at time, Absalom drew more people than David had in terms of warriors. And so rather than fight his own son, he evacuated Jerusalem. He just kind of abdicated his throne. Said it was never mine to begin with. It's God's. He can protect me if he wants. But it seemed like a fight was inevitable. Absalom was bent on it. And so there was some fighting. Lots of Absalom people got killed. One time Absalom was trying to escape, and he had his long, beautiful, flowing black locks of hair, and as he was escaping, his hair got caught in some low-hanging branches, and Joab, David's commander, came up to him and speared him 3 times in the heart, and they buried him there. And it says, when David heard this, he just wept. It says in 2 Samuel 18:33, and the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And he cried out. He said, oh, my son, Absalom, my son, would I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. The king loved him so much, even though he had rebelled against him, even though that he attempted to kill him. Be wary of rebellion in our hearts, folks. Be wary of brooding revenge, unforgiveness, and bitterness. You choose to sin, you choose to suffer. And sin makes you stupid. The result of David's sin included the death of a baby, the rape of a woman, the murder of another man, of his son, the rebellion of another son, and his eventual horrific death as well. Sooner or later, sin brings forth death. Some people say, yeah, but the cost of obedience is so high. The cost of obedience is high, but the cost of disobedience is higher.